24 hours before kickoff, the entire plan for Thursday night changed. And it changed because of a play nobody wanted to see happen. Word out of the Houston camp is that the Texans are now expected to sit several starters, especially on defense, with a handful of offensive names possibly getting a brief look, maybe a series or two out of CJ Stroud before he's pulled for good. What actually caught my attention wasn't the sitting starters part on its own. Teams do that constantly in August. It was how sudden the shift was. Both sides reportedly walked into this week expecting real snaps from their first teamers, and now Houston is pulling back, and the reason traces directly to an injury. A wide receiver who looked like a legitimate breakout piece for that offense tore his ACL during the joint practice against Las Vegas. That's exactly the kind of moment that scrambles a coaching staff's entire risk calculus overnight. Think about what a change like that actually signals. DeMeco Ryans and his staff clearly walked into this week planning to play their guys for a drive or two, maybe a full quarter. Watching a piece you were counting on for the regular season go down on a non-contact injury during a joint practice is the kind of thing that makes a head coach immediately reassess everyone else's exposure. Once you've already absorbed one real loss, the last thing you want is to compound it by putting your actual difference makers on the field for a game with zero competitive value beyond health and evaluation. My guess is Stroud barely sees the field tomorrow, if he sees it at all. I'd bet Nico Collins sits too, along with most of the names casual fans would recognize on that roster. Where I still expect Houston to let guys compete for real is at the positions still genuinely up for grabs. A tackle spot, a guard job, the roster bubble situations that actually need live snaps to get settled before final cuts. Those are the players who need the tape, not established veterans who already know exactly what their role looks like come September. There's real precedent here worth remembering, and it comes straight from how the Raiders handled their own preseason opener against Arizona a couple weeks ago. Brock Bowers played exactly one snap. Trey McBride, the tight end on the other sideline, also played exactly one snap. That symmetry doesn't happen by accident. That's two coaching staffs quietly agreeing on a plan before kickoff, matching workloads so nobody gets caught off guard by what the other team does with its stars. The offense got one series that night, Arizona's offense got two, and Las Vegas sat Max Crosby, the same week Arizona sat Josh Sweat. That's how this dance usually works in August. Two front offices coordinating behind the scenes, so the tape doesn't end up skewed by one side playing for real while the other one runs a walkthrough. So when Houston says the original plan involved starters and that plan is now shifting, the natural read is that Las Vegas had been gearing up to match that same energy in response. Whether Clint Kubiak sticks with his original approach now that Houston has pulled back, I honestly don't know yet. But if I'm being straight with you about what this specific roster needs, I want the starters out there. I want the reps. This is a brand new coaching staff installing an entirely new system from scratch this offseason. And that's a fundamentally different situation than a Houston team running back the same scheme with the same quarterback for a second straight year. The Texans can afford to rest continuity. The Raiders, at this stage of a rebuild, really can't afford to rest installation. And that installation gap is exactly why this game matters more than a typical Week 2 preseason tune-up usually would. Go back to that joint practice a couple days ago and you'll remember it wasn't pretty for Las Vegas. The Raiders got outworked out there, and it wasn't only Raiders fans saying so either. Plenty of Texans supporters described a real talent gap between the two rosters that day. And even some of the more level-headed Raiders voices admitted the offensive line specifically had a rough stretch. Here's the thing about one joint practice period though. A single bad session doesn't tell you the whole story on its own. What I actually want to know heading into Thursday is whether that struggle holds up across a full 60 minutes, drive 3, drive 5, drive 8, the way it would on a real regular season Sunday against a defense this talented. That's the actual test tomorrow night. Not whether Las Vegas wins or loses on the scoreboard, but whether the specific issues that surfaced in practice repeat themselves once the game goes live, and real roster stakes enter the picture. Which brings me straight to the offensive line. Because if there's one storyline hanging over this entire preseason for this franchise, it's this group. DJ Glaze reportedly got beaten up pretty badly in that joint session. Caleb Rogers had a similarly rough go of it on the other side. Even the depth tackle working mostly against Houston's second unit took his share of lumps. The right side of that front, Rodgers over to Glaze, reportedly struggled across the board that day. And here's the uncomfortable truth heading into the regular season. Wherever this offensive line goes, this team goes with it. If the Raiders win 4 games this year, it's because that group couldn't hold up. If they win 12, it's because that group turned into something real. You can scheme Brock Bowers as wide open as you want on any given Sunday, but if the quarterback doesn't have time to actually find him, none of that scheme work matters at all. So I want to see Glaze get extended snaps this week, ideally a full quarter's worth, because 10 or 11 plays last week simply wasn't enough of a sample to judge whether the improved footwork and confidence I saw in flashes actually holds up against a defense that's going to test him repeatedly and with real intent. Same deal with Rodgers. I want to see both of these guys against different fronts, different pass rush games, different disguises than what they saw in that one joint practice. Because a single opponent's tendencies can make a player look considerably better or worse than he actually is heading into a real season. Behind both of them, the right guard situation keeps getting murkier by the week. Jackson Powers-Johnson going down again in practice, walking off under his own power but not finishing the session, tells me this staff has to seriously plan around Spencer Burford as a legitimate answer at that spot. Not just a fallback they're hoping they never need. Burford has looked solid through camp. Whether that holds up against a defensive front with real talent is a completely different question. And it's exactly the kind of question preseason exists to answer before it actually matters. Now let's talk about the player I'm genuinely most excited to watch, and it isn't a household name yet. Malik Benson has quietly been building a real case for himself throughout camp, and I want to know if it's actually for real or another mirage. We've been burned by camp hype before out of this receiver room. Dante Thornton had a similar wave of buzz last year, and it mostly didn't translate once real football started, partly because a lot of what made Thornton look good in camp was structural rather than individual. He was running go routes and posts against a defense already beaten underneath on other plays, with a clean pocket behind him because the protection wasn't under any real duress yet. Take away that clean pocket, and that kind of production evaporates fast, which is essentially what happened for long stretches once the game started counting last season. Benson's flashes look different to me this time. He's not just winning deep against soft coverage. He's running actual intermediate concepts, digs at 15 yards, separating from real coverage rather than soft zone that opens up on its own. He went up and high-pointed a genuinely contested catch with a defender draped all over him, and that ball came from Aiden O'Connell, who deserves credit himself for trusting a rookie receiver in a 50-50 spot instead of playing it safe and checking down. That's the real difference between manufactured camp hype and legitimate translatable production. And I want extended run for Benson this week specifically, to see if it holds up against a defense playing for keeps. If Houston really is resting most of its defensive starters tomorrow, that works against Benson's case a little, because I want to see him win against genuine starting caliber competition, not a scout team look that inflates the tape. But even against a rotational secondary, route detail either shows up on film or it doesn't. And that's what I'll be watching closest. If the Raiders end up playing more backups than starters because of how Houston approaches this game, that likely means a heavier workload for Fernando Mendoza. And honestly, that's fine by me. What I want from Mendoza this week isn't a clean stat line. I want to see him push the football down the field. He processes carefully, takes the check down first, works underneath before testing anything vertical, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that approach in a vacuum. But this is preseason. I don't care if he finishes 4 for 16 as long as some of those incompletions are legitimate shots downfield. Ones that tell me something real about his aggression level once a defense starts sitting on the short stuff. On defense, this is where things get genuinely interesting for me, because the names I want to watch aren't the ones anybody's already sold on. Kieran Crawford, the rookie edge piece, has quietly looked better than I expected through 2 weeks of preseason. And I'll break that tape down in more depth once we've got 2 full games to actually work from. Sion Sloan is the other name I keep coming back to. I watched his college tape closely before camp started, and that cross-chop move he wins to the outside with is legitimately nasty. He already got a sack off it in the first preseason game. What I want to see now is variety. Does he have a counter, a spin, a two-hand swipe, anything to keep tackles honest once they've already seen the chop on tape once. He was genuinely disruptive, rushing the passer. No real question there, but lined up more as an interior piece. He got stood up and washed out of a few run plays fairly easily. That tells me his eventual role probably looks like a wide alignment edge rusher rather than a true interior piece. And I want the staff to deploy him that way more consistently this week to confirm it. Tonka Hemingway only played 8 or 9 snaps last time and didn't show me much in that limited window, so I'm hoping for a bigger sample before forming any real opinion. All 3 of these guys are essentially auditioning for the same handful of rotational spots behind the names everybody already trusts. Crosby and Adam Butler, chief among them. And I don't need to spend much energy on those 2 specifically this week, because we already know what they are. And then there's the cornerback storyline I honestly can't stop thinking about. Jamal McCoy. He gave up 3 catches in the opener, 2 went for touchdowns, and the 3rd came on what I believe was a 3rd down conversion. On the surface, that stat line looks bad, and plenty of people are going to write him off after a game like that. But dig into who actually beat him on those specific reps. These were veteran depth receivers, guys who've been around the league 4 or 5 years. Bottom of the roster survivors who know exactly how to win contested savvy reps against a rookie corner still building his instincts in real time. McCoy played 31 total snaps in that game, 17 in coverage, and gave up all 3 catches on those 17 coverage snaps specifically. The other 14, by most accounts, he handled cleanly. What actually stands out once you watch the full tape instead of just the highlight reel touchdowns is the movement. People around the building have told me his overall athletic profile in coverage might genuinely be the best on the entire roster right now. And you can see exactly why once you sit through all 31 reps, instead of the 2 or 3 that made the post-game package. All 3 catches he allowed came specifically in press coverage, which is a small but genuinely important detail because it tells you exactly which part of his game still needs seasoning. In off coverage, he looked comfortable mirroring routes and closing throwing windows in real time. Up at the line, jamming a receiver at the snap and staying in phase downfield, that's precisely where the rookie mistakes crept in. And that's a completely normal growing pain for a young corner, still building the instincts for exactly when to strike and when to stay patient. I want to see him get more press reps this week, not fewer, because the only way that skill develops is by absorbing those lumps now, in August, instead of in October, when the margin for error disappears. There are a couple of wrinkles from last week's tape worth keeping an eye on too, because I think there's a real chance we see them resurface Thursday. There's a shovel pass concept with a receiver lined up next to Mendoza in shotgun, the ball getting pitched to that side while another receiver motions across to lead block, and a tight end works down inside. I never actually saw that exact concept show up in the first preseason game, even though it was clearly something this staff installed and repped extensively in the offseason. So if it shows up Thursday, that's a real scheme note worth tracking. On that same theme, keep an eye on the offensive line reps in isolation rather than just the box score. There was a pass protection rep lost on the depth chart last week worth revisiting on film, the kind of detail that tells you more about a real roster battle than any highlight ever could, especially for a depth lineman trying to carve out one of the last spots heading into cut-down day. So here's where all of this leaves me heading into Thursday night. The scoreboard almost certainly isn't going to tell the real story here, not with both teams likely playing a patchwork mix of starters, bubble guys, and pure backups, depending on exactly how Ryans and Kubiak handle their rosters once the ball goes live. What will tell the real story is whether Glaze and Rodgers look like a fixed problem or a lingering one heading toward the regular season, whether Malik Benson's route running genuinely translates against a defense playing for real, even a rotational one, whether Mendoza shows any vertical aggression once given clean pockets and real weapons, and whether the young defensive pieces, Sloan, Crawford, Hemingway, and a corner like McCoy looking to bounce back from a rough opener, start turning flashes into something this staff can actually trust once the games begin counting for real. None of these storylines get fully resolved in one night, and I don't expect them to. But the direction each one trends on Thursday tells you a great deal about how this roster genuinely looks once real cuts start happening, no matter who Houston ultimately decides to dress out for kickoff. That's ultimately what preseason football is actually for, even when the broadcast treats it like a real game with real stakes attached to the final score. Nobody remembers the outcome of a Thursday night exhibition 6 months from now. What people do remember is whether a young corner turned a rough opener into a real developmental jump, whether a rookie receiver's route running held up once defenses stopped playing soft, and whether an offensive line that got exposed in a joint practice found an answer before the games actually started counting. Those are the threads I'm pulling on tomorrow night, regardless of exactly how many starters Houston decides to put on the field.